Have you ever been to those meetings where people are introducing themselves in terms of their county? And no one ever says Nairobi County. We always remember all the other 46 counties before we say, or when we say Nairobi, you say, I'm from Nairobi, but, and then you bring all the others. And to say that when we talk about culture, we're talking about who we really are. And in this conversation, we will be talking about cultural heritage frameworks in Nairobi City County. I always find that name so fascinating. And we'll start by talking about the context. You know, everybody, I think almost here, has used the word diversity. And we'll be talking about, first of all, this amazing diversity of cultural forms, knowledges, and practices. And we'll also be talking about the opportunities. We are over a century old as an urban settlement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then we will want to look at what are the challenges and opportunities that come with this history. We'll also be looking at the Nairobi City Cultural Heritage Act. How many of you know that act? Okay, so we'll introduce a little bit. I can see most people in the room didn't even know we had one. We'll touch a little bit on it. And today, I think throughout the whole day, people will keep coming back to that act. And then we'll ask ourselves what other policies exist that we as Nairobians can take hold of. And finally, go to a wish list. What would we want us to be able to do to move this conversation beyond just a nice conversation? But I wanted to start by introducing the real hero of the story, Nairobi. Nairobi is a beautiful, beautiful, she's got to be a she. I can't imagine Nairobi as being anything else but she, because she has a personality. So Nairobi is set on the ancestral lands of the Maasai, has always been strategically important as a capital. It was set up as a permanent settlement, one of the few permanent settlements that the Maasai people had that we know of, because of its location and proximity to the seat of power that Laibon Mbatian had, and he was in Ngong. So Nairobi was set up as a way of being able to monitor what was happening on the plains as people came towards Ngong. As an urban center, you guys all know this story, and by the way, this is one of the tragedies. We all think Nairobi only began when what came up from the coast? A railway. People wanting to build a railway. When those people wanting to build a railway came here, first of all, they recognized the strategic, political, and economic importance of this space. And so they decided to set up a supply depot here, and later on, it became the headquarters of what was supposed to be the Mombasa, the Uganda Railway, actually. And this then drove it to become an economic center that brought in an influx of people, both indigenous and settlers from everywhere. And this is the roots to what we keep talking about the diversity. That's the roots to that. In 1900, it was incorporated as a township. And in 1901, the first cultural building, Nairobi Club, began to be built, as well as a race course. And it's interesting to me that you find cultural infrastructure coming into this space before even administrative infrastructure. 1905, it became the capital of the British Protectorate of East Africa. Keep a hand on that word, capital. 1919, its boundaries were extended. It became a municipality. Exactly a century ago, in 1923, it got its first mayor. In 1926, the first planning consultant is appointed. Up until then, Nairobi just mushroomed. And this is why Nairobi keeps resisting this thing to plan. It's like, no, we'll just grow the way we want to grow. In 1950, Nairobi became a city with a royal charter of incorporation marking its birthday gift. In 1963, exactly how many years ago? Hey, people, Kenya at? Nairobi, as Kenya gained its independence, Nairobi formally became the capital of Kenya. So as we celebrate 60 years of Kenya, we also celebrate 60 years of Nairobi as our capital city. 1964, the first indigenous mayor. And that tells us about Nairobi's character. The first female mayor, let me add, came in 1975, And women, we have to just take hold of this city, because look at, okay, let me just keep quiet. 2013, moving on swiftly, 10 years ago, Nairobi became a county number 47. And so, you know, we can look at it and you can see that Nairobi has been plagued by administrative wars as a city and district, partly complicated by its status as a capital city. In 1984, the city council was dissolved, a commission was put in place. We all know what happened between 2020 and 2022. This is the story of Nairobi. What does that have to do with what you guys are passionate about? And I've picked a history that actually touches on all of your interests. Does anybody want to go first? Thank you, Maurice.
For me, I was thinking about the difficult separation between administration and culture and art, where, yes, they do kind of move simultaneously. One is a softer side, the other one is more a bit aggressive and controlling. But they still have very cordial relationship between the two of them. That's what I think about Nairobi.
Maurice, let me just keep it on you for a minute. And you're also not just a storyteller, that's how you describe yourself in some ways, but you're also really invested in community. You think of yourself as somebody whose work it is to build community. So what you just said about this conversation between culture and administration, how does that then reflect into what you are passionate about doing?
I feel like most of the problems that we have, sometimes we wait for a superhero to solve them for us. And I think Kenya always waits for a superhero, aka Boniface Mwangi, to solve some of our challenges. But I think the solution lies within ourselves. And I like the fact that we came in and the first thing that Irene did was to say, write your vision of what you think Nairobi will be, because then the solution is within us. So I've fallen in love with working with community to solve for challenges that we are facing, because more than often you need that person who convenes and sets the ground rules for how to engage, or to be their best and bring out their best to solve for this. I call it collective problem solving, where we are collectively problem solving for something that is affecting us. So my role, I always see it as, let me just go back again. I also like the fact of how you introduced Julius, because more than often when we work with government or people in power, it is always antagonistic. And I think we all agree on the why we are doing things. We mostly disagree on the how we do things. And if we can find spaces for discussing the how, even with government and administrators, then you find the life becomes easier and you become less antagonistic. So that's my vision. My vision is to bring the community, including government and other people in power and control, to find a middle ground.
And to see culture then as a way of bringing people together.
Yeah.
Okay.
To see culture and the way we bring people together. And that's why I think also you look at most of the organizations that we lead have some sort of culture. If you didn't notice that Baraza's logo is a three-legged stool. And we can all attest to what three-legged stools were when we sit around the community and discuss some of our challenges. And even the word Baraza itself, we call Barazas to discuss, right? So that's the center and core of our existence as an organization and as Maurice.
Okay, so seeing Nairobi as a space of different communities coming together in community and using culture to continue to develop what Nairobi is.
So for me, settlement as a cultural proposition is one of the things that I'm picking up from the brief history that you've run us through, and how you shared that as early, as far back as 1901, one of the first things that the European settlers did was to embed themselves through their culture. And what were those evidences of culture? Things like clubs, things like race courses. But the Asian community also did the same. They had temples, they also had clubs, and of course they were very much an economic community, so they also had the markets and the shops that began to shape the space. Now, the Africans inhabiting the city actually did not have the same opportunity. And so sometimes we forget that actually the antecedent to the city to us should be that layer that is the Maasai layer, should be that idea that the capital, so to speak, was Ngong for Maasai, and then Nairobi was kind of the outpost, the kind of lookout. And how do we begin to build the notion of identity and belonging from that idea of the Maasai lookout? And that's a little bit difficult to do. So we work with the heritage that then comes to us through the colony, whether it's Asian heritage, whether it's colonial white heritage, and then begin to see how spaces like this, which is one of them, become things that we inhabit. So the whole notion also of cultural inhabitation, of things that have come before you that were not part of you, I think are also interesting and important. And some of the work that we do at the Godan Art Center is actually sort of saying, what is our relevance as an art center in this question of making city and making nation and beginning to think about the kind of identities that we are as contemporary people who had certain pasts, but who are also creating heritage now. What does that look like? How do we convert the heritage that we've inherited, but how do we also make new heritage? So Nainihu was really about that. Nainihu was about going into the neighborhoods of Nairobi, where you're finding new inhabitants that have come in, some of them not born in the city, some of them adopted in the city, some of them born in the city, and trying to think about what does it mean to be Nairobian? What does it mean to be walking down the Mathare River and finding chang'aa being brewed and a small vegetable garden happening there? Do these things mean nothing? We think they mean everything. We think it is the beginning of planting ourselves in this city, and that these are important markers of making future for ourselves. So yeah, so cultural inhabitations, cultural settlements, the city as a cultural proposition is something that's very important to us.
Do I know you, professionally, you are an architect? I don't know if you use the term you are or you were, or you know, once an architect, always an architect. And one thing I've always been interested about is that you always make me conscious of the environment. Could you say something about our built environment? If somebody comes to Nairobi, they've never been here, and they're going through, now you've talked about communities, but what strikes you about Nairobi's built environment as our cultural DNA? What does it say about us?
I think the built environment, again, springs from the experience and the history. One of the things that you notice about our planned environment or our spatial environment is how segregated it is. When we ran that festival over here, one of the things that we noticed was how much we sit in neighborhoods that do not interact, that do not intersect, and how difficult it is to enter another neighborhood because there is no public destination, no open destination that I can walk into Jericho and just hang out. If I walk into Jericho, people are going to say, who is she, what is she doing here? What do you want here? There isn't a space that I can just arrive at, and it doesn't matter because it's just an arrival place. So one of the things around our spatial environment and our built environment is that it doesn't have public spaces that enable us to find the points of interaction. More of those need to be built. So that question of connection, interconnection, intersection is something that is clearly lacking. But then I think the other thing that we see is that the structures that we are beginning to build now are not respected as structures because they seem very temporary, and they are very temporary. So when you look at Kibra, for example, and you're looking at it aerially, you might decide, wow, largest slum in Africa, or whatever they're saying, but once you step into it and you begin to move through it, you're finding lives being lived and spaces and places being made. Yeah? And you can track that through culture. You can say, okay, so I'm here, where do I go? I'll go to the Maasai Mbili space, okay, sawa. Then I'll go to the Uweza space, that's another cultural space. Then I know there's an artist called Solo who lives here, let me go find where Solo is. You begin to find that this space is made and identified, even if it looks temporary. And for me, these are the seed beds of the new city. So that built environment has the emerging city, the emerging reality, in my view, coming out of it, that we really need to think about as planners, but at the same time, there is old heritage, there's legacy that comes from that colony that we also need to adapt and then see what do they become. Yeah.
So just for you guys to think about, when you're building your big mansions in Nairobi, where do you put them? What do they look like? You know, what does it say? How does what you're putting up speak to what Nairobi is? And yeah, I can see a lot of guilty faces because you guys just go with, I don't want an architect, I don't want a, me, I'll just put up, Jenga, this year we Jenga floor 1, next year tuweke kaka extension. And you're not thinking about what is that saying about Nairobi. I want to move from this very local, it's right down, grassroots, so to speak, if you can talk about grass in Nairobi, and some places there is no grass, to the big picture of Nairobi is a capital city. What does it mean that we are both this very local, very much about my neighbor, and yet we're also a reflection of Nairobi, not just now as the capital of Kenya, but as having been the capital of the British Protectorate? Where do we get, what does it mean to us that Nairobi is both ours and it also belongs to the rest of the Kenya? We are both Nairobi bubble, but also the gateway to Kenya. Julius.
Coming back to what you have asked about now, Nairobi City being the convergence of all the communities, people living in the city and even those from outside. So what does that bring? That brings together all the cultural diversity of the Kenyan people meeting here in Nairobi City. And it becomes a learning experience of how the cultures interact and how the dialogue can be brought forward. We have the Luos, we have the Kikuyus. Of course, we know the histories and the cultures are different, but once they are all here, we have the mixture, and then we can learn from one another, and we can even move the conversation further and talk about national cohesion and integration because of all the cultures interacting and appreciating one another. So I think Nairobi, being the capital, it's a place where we need to be proud of, and we need to be able to people appreciate one another in terms of cultural promotion and cultural development. Thank you.
And it's great that we can do that, but sometimes I also get, I guess, troubled. Because when I think of culture in Nairobi, I'm not really sure where does the national capital stop and my Nairobi start. What's this relationship between the national government and the county government? Who owns what? Is Uhuru Park ours as Nairobians, or is Uhuru Park Kenyans? Is Jivanji ours as Nairobians, or does it belong to the whole of Kenya? How do we negotiate? How do you guys negotiate between national and county?
This takes me back to the Constitution 2010, Schedule 4, where the functions of the two levels of governments are clearly defined. Cultural activities and cultural facilities are default to function as per the Schedule 4. So what that basically means is that cultural activities taking place at the county level are governed and managed by the county governments. But of course, the national government has a clear role to play in terms of policy direction, in terms of setting standards, and in terms of capacity building the county governments. So there are also those other national activities which are of national look, which it's a function of the national government to bring together the county governments in participating in those activities. So to answer the question, facilities like Jivanji, like Uhuru Park, those are cultural facilities which are within the purview of the county government. But of course, when it comes to policy development, it is the national government that will come up with the policy documents, the overall policy like the culture and heritage policy, which is a reference point for the county governments when they are coming up with their county-based laws, policies, and policy framework. So I will basically say that there is an interaction in between the national government and the county government, especially when it comes to implementation of and promotion of cultural and creative activities. But there has been, to some extent, I don't want to call it a misunderstanding, but somehow, because culture is an default function, yes, the national government does not have that, the audience, so to say. No, not really audience, but the constituency, because people are out there in the county governments. But of course, you know, Kenya has signed cultural protocols, Kenya has signed international laws, and these things, of course, will come to the national government, which, of course, has now to trickle down to the county government. So there has to be a close working relationship between the national government and the county government to enable our people benefit from some of the things which come with the international obligations in the culture and creative sector. Thank you.
Okay, so most things we see in Nairobi under the county government, but a place like this, because it's Kenya Cultural Center, is the national government. Do you understand that?
Yeah, sure. There are national facilities which are not involved. Facilities like Kenya Cultural Center, facilities like National Museums of Kenya, those are under the national government and they are managed by the national government. It's only those facilities which are within the purview of the county governments, like for those who have gone through the Act, the Nairobi City Act, the one we are discussing today, you will see a place where they are talking of establishing facilities, cultural facilities like county cultural centers in consultation with Kenya Cultural Center and advice from the national government.
But you also mentioned protocols, international, and so on. Judy, I want to come to you because Nairobi is not just about Kenya, but we are a hub. We're a hub for East Africa. We're a hub for Africa. We are a global hub. So what does that mean when it comes to culture and Nairobi? And if you know aliens landed today, they might well pick Nairobi because, hey, we want a wonderful, amazing, vibrant cultural hub. Let's go to Nairobi. So what does that mean in terms of who we are as a global center?
I think Joy and everybody on the panel has actually, set the stage for that aspect of being a global and yet a national and a city as well. And what Julius has said is really true, that even as a country, we have signed up to different protocols, different conventions that then also impact on the city. And so, for example, the one that comes to mind very quickly is the one on diversity of cultural expression. And when you asked your earlier question, I was thinking about how rich and diverse this city is and how we, as people in Nairobi, can really leverage that richness, whether you're talking about it being a historical but also a very modern city, whether you're talking about being, a melting pot for the different ethnic and cultural groups and, peoples in Kenya, whether you're talking about whatever you're talking about, creative expressions, you will find them here, whether it is something that is dynamic. We used to talk a lot about the Matatu culture and how unique it is, an offering that it is from Nairobi that then is, emulated out of Nairobi. So there's what Nairobi expression is, but what it means outside there. And another protocol that comes to mind is what we call the historical urban landscape. And that is really taking into consideration the fact that even historical buildings or historical cultural offerings are set in a modern context, and there must be some way that these two, you call it binary, or these two aspects live in harmony together, so that there is that respect for culture, whether it is historical or urban, and that they are living in the same context. So when we look at Nairobi, we have a lot of opportunities. And I think Irene talked about Nakuru being one of the UNESCO creative cities. And we've been actually working towards Nairobi being one of the creative cities because of exactly that. When people come from out, and even from us as Nairobians, we know how vibrant this city is. What do we want to sell out in the world, and what is it that we want to attract local and international visitors to Nairobi for. And there's, I think there's a time I was talking recently about the number of festivals that have been started in Nairobi. I mean, Joy talked about Nainihu. I don't know whether we all know about Nainihu, but I was actually working with Joy when we started Nainihu. And there was, even before that, there was what we were calling Mabumbum Festival. And that was what, in the 1990s perhaps. Sorry, my age is now beginning to show.
The wisdom.
But what am I saying? I'm saying that there's a lot to capitalize on in Nairobi that is very uniquely Nairobi to the globe, to the world. And we need, I think, to really recognize the gems that we have, whether it is in terms of institutions. I was recently in Bomas of Kenya, and I was reminded of the richness of that space as a physical space, as a space that we go to. Every time we have visitors, they talk about, oh, Nairobi and the national park. This is the only city that has a national park in it. There's so many things that we can tap into as a city in the globe, and as a unique city, and having an offering that is unique to Nairobi. But also just thinking about the things that we take for granted a little bit. The craft market, Maasai Market, it's grown, but then it has become something that is identifiable as something in Nairobi. So how do these conversations move from pockets of civil society organizations, government, county government, national government, to something that is more sustainable, something that we can be able to look back and see how it has grown over the years. I know that the city has already established a festival, a Nairobi festival, that we hope that will grow. But what are all these? And then the neighborhood festivals. I think you'll probably talk about the Kili festival that's happening, I think, next weekend. There's so many things that we can capitalize on and work towards that then help this city become a global city that is looked up to and really becomes a hub for creativity and for creative expression. Yeah.
I want to move on and think about those policy. What is it we can do? Because it's startling to me that you say we are working on making Nairobi a cultural city, when Nakuru has gotten there before us. Like how? And so to ask what's holding us back. And one thing when you were speaking, you said the Maasai Market. For me, it delights me in the sense that when you get to the Maasai Market, they are the Maasai women, usually, who are there with all their, everything that you can say, this is why this is a Maasai Market. But then there's everything else. And I always think about being in Zambia, and we wanted to go out and, get souvenirs and stuff. And somebody said to us, you want someone to take you to the Maasai Market? And I thought, I'm sorry, in Zambia you have a Maasai Market. Like, what do you mean you have a Maasai Market? But it's something that people are beginning across the continent to think of the Maasai Market without thinking about how is it that we're talking about a Maasai Market. And we have that history going back to when the Maasai Market was on Tuesday, and there's a reason why at the bus stop, as people came into the city, but we're not capitalizing on it. So why has Nairobi struggled? How could Nairobi not be the first cultural city in Kenya? UNESCO. What do you have against my city?
Let me laugh. No. Look, UNESCO offers the platform, the framework, and then it has to be taken up by the city. That's the truth. And to be honest, Nakuru was revving, dying, moving, wanting to go. And the framework that we have for UNESCO cultural cities is that it has to be driven by the county government, the mayor, the governor. It cannot be driven by any other. Why? Because of the sustainability of it. You want that the governor and the county government actually owns the process of it being called, not only the process, but the implementation of it being called a cultural city. And so, a creative city. And so when Nakuru was ready and saying they want to be known as a city for folklore, remember for creative cities, what you need to do is to demonstrate that city will really implement and really invest in that particular creative expression. So it's not only about what they are known for, but what they are going to invest in. So it's a commitment from the city. So if Nakuru was ready to make that commitment, and the governor was right in the forefront to ensure that they're able to sign up and say, yes, we will invest in that, and so be it, Nakuru becomes. But it doesn't stop Nairobi from actually applying to be creative cities for something else. What do we want to be known for? So I can tell you for free that now that we have a governor that is very open and receptive, we are in the process of encouraging Nairobi to be a creative city. So I think that, that we can safely say that that process is going along.
Okay, so you've brought me then, and in the minutes we have left, because I do want to come to the audience, so there's what the governor can do, there's what the city government of Nairobi County, city government can do. And we deliberately don't have them on the panel, because then we'll all start saying, Nyinyi watu mfanye hivi. We're going to come to that later on in the day. But we have a document. We have a law. We actually have a cultural heritage bill that became an act. Many of us were involved in that 5 years ago. So what is it that we actually have already, and what can we do with that? And I'm going to ask Joy. I know that the Creative Economy Working Group, I know the Go Down, and I know that you personally were very invested and worked on this act. Could you just give us the highlights of it?
Yeah, so in 2017, I think the Creative Economy Working Group has been pursuing and staying alert to opportunities and moments where policy and legislation around culture are happening, and to try and see how, to the extent possible, it can be a voice of the sector to bring in some of those ideas and questions that are coming from the field, from the sector. So in 2017, we became aware that the county had a bill that was about to be passed, and there hadn't been a process of participation. So very quickly, the Creative Economy Working Group convened with actually the Department of Culture and a few other actors to try and to read through this act, that bill at that point in time, and then to try and see what was missing and what could be included within that short window. So what you will find on the Nairobi County Assembly website is the 2017 legislation, the act as it is. And if you compare that to the bill, you'll find that there have been certain developments in this act since the bill. So an expansion, and the expansion particularly to try and include creative and cultural industries. But even that inclusion is not yet complete. And so one hopes that this is an act that we'll continue to engage with so that we can make it even more robust. So some of the things that it speaks to, very specifically, are cultural sites, cultural activities, and then, of course, creating awareness around the cultural heritage of the county, and then trying to see how to create structures to protect and regulate cultural activities and cultural heritage in the county. I think some of the things that we notice in that particular bill is that it speaks very much on culture. It doesn't speak about the cultural actors. So it seems that the point of the center of sort of analysis or protection, or the lens that it enters through, is really the culture more generally, not the cultural actor and not the artist. So there are no definitions of artist or cultural practitioner in this particular piece of legislation. And that, I think, is something that needs to be developed, because if you're going to talk about the creative economy, then the creative economy really is centered around an actor. The other thing that, of course, it doesn't speak to is that this space is urban. And so some of the language, we're going camping, we're looking at culture this way, that way, but we're not looking at urban culture. And urban culture is emerging in this space in a very particular way. And I think that that's something that we need to think about and sort of say, how do you create legislation that speaks to a space that is definitely urban? This is not rural, this is urban. So what does that mean? What does urban culture look like, and how do we create legislation around that and around identities that are becoming more urban? I think the other thing that is perhaps missing in this act, which would be great to see as we continue to engage it, is that creative civil society is getting even more robust and becoming an even bigger player in shaping Nairobi. And so it's missing elements that would have mechanisms for collaborative practice, and these are some of the things that you're seeing Baraza Media is doing in MOUs with the county, things that the Go Down itself is also trying to do with MOUs with the county. So that space of extending co-implementers and collaborators in this act is also something that is missing. So I think in sum it sits very much around the question of cultural sites, cultural activities, cultural heritage. It begins to give a nod to creative and cultural industries, and that I think is the next aspect that could be developed, so that we begin to think about the status of the artist and the role of the artist or the role of the cultural practitioner in this act as well.
But that was passed in 2017. So suppose now I'm interested because I'm a photographer and I went out into the streets and I suddenly began to think, my goodness, do I need a license? What's going on over here? And now that you said it, I want to engage. Is it too late? Because it's already an act. It's been there for 5 years. I've just found out about it. Is there any opportunity to engage and make either amendments or do something about new legislation?
No, absolutely. I think there is opportunity always to engage. So as a citizen, you know that there's no time you cannot engage. It's finding the mechanisms of engaging. I think one of the things that I find very progressive and heartwarming around what's happening with Nairobi County now is that the Department for City Arts, Culture and Tourism is a distinct department. So its focus is really arts, culture and tourism in the city. So this is a real space for engagement. And one of the things that that department has done is to actually employ a whole cadre of cultural officers who I hope we'll soon get to know, who will sit across all of the sub-counties of Nairobi. You know, there's 17 sub-counties. And each of those sub-counties, as I understand, will carry 2 cultural officers. So within the sub-county, if you're sitting in Starehe, as we do, or sitting wherever you're sitting, you can approach your sub-county officer and begin to speak about these things. Because some of these things are, of course, missing in the legislation, but they can be things that they can begin to think about in terms of the other spaces where regulation can come in, and where the opportunities for you being identified and included and classified as a cultural worker and cultural actor in Nairobi County can be made possible. So I think look out for that. We certainly have embarked on a partnership with the county around this to try and see how this act is a process that can be re-looked at, but also that the cultural officers can become more aware of the resources that they have within the sector, which is all of you, all of us who are engaged, and together to begin to see how we can strengthen those spaces for legislation and for policy. Because policy is also missing in Nairobi County. We've just leapt to legislation and we don't have a philosophical, a policy environment around what does culture mean in this city, and how does that speak to what the city wants to be.
Thank you. And of course, that's in conversation with what Julius told us earlier, that we do have a national cultural policy and a national cultural act that we need to also know and put them in conversation. Judy, do you want to add anything to that? I know you've also done some work on this, but a little.
Just to add that I understand that, of course, when, 5 years ago has been some time, and it's taken some time for it to take root, and so the idea now is to see how we can update the act. That I heard from somebody from county, and so I think what Joy was talking about in terms of modalities of engagement is key, because we can see from the sector, we can see what the gaps are, and we can see the readiness and the readiness of the county to actually engage. But what is that engagement like, and what are the modalities of that engagement? And I think it's actually time now to be able to do that, because there's a hunger or there's a need for updating the act as 5 years on. So I think that I think that there's going to be somebody from county who's going to be able to talk this afternoon, but let's see how we are able to engage and what that might look like.
Baraza is doing some interesting work around this. If you could just let us know what that is, and then I would like Julius to just tell us if you want to add anything about how what Nairobi is doing is in conversation with the bigger national picture.
The county right now is engaging at least, and that's a good thing. We played a very small part as an organization in terms of having photographers take photos in Nairobi for free. And to be honest, right now, Nairobi is beautiful when you go on a Sunday. The only challenge as of now is that you've been allowed to take pictures. But I don't think there's enough enabling that has been made to take pictures. By enabling, I mean there's still insecurity in terms of you have to take care of yourself and your cameras and everything. And with our diversity, we do have people who are called chokoras. And sometimes they do take some corners, and that's their corner, and if they see you with their camera. So I think that's where they need to enable. They have allowed photographers to take pictures. And I'm happy because the county listens, and it was something that we just lifted. And you've seen also on social media when anybody is arrested, even the governor at that level comes in to assist. With that good spirit that they have had, we've managed to have conversations with them on 2 areas. One, as we've all alluded to, is dialogues. And we have something called Governor's Baraza, that is part of something we've signed with the governor. And I think it's something that we also welcome everyone and anyone who wants to be part of it. It's not a Baraza thing. Baraza, as I said, is a convener. But it's a public dialogue where the governor himself shows up to have a conversation with the creative sector and civil society organizations that are within that space. And the dialogue is not finger pointing. It's more of, this is what we can do for you. What can you do for us? And through that, just that conversation then came the birth of Kile Fest, Kilelesho Festival, that our very able MCA, Robert Alai, also championed for it to happen. Through dialogues with the governor also. Because the idea of Nairobi is, it's about these neighborhoods, I remember watching, was it Vioja Makamani? And Ondiek Nyukakota used to say something like, maybe natoka Kilelesho, and you could associate Kilelesho with like this guy, and that's what I think the governor is trying to bring, or the various administrators are trying to bring back, where there's that pride in identity. If you're a hip hop artist and you are from Dandora, you associate with the culture that came up with that. So maybe next we should have a Dandora festival or something that is happening. I think those kind of festival and convenings brings back pride to us and brings back ownership to where we are. The other thing that we've signed with the governor is the creative space as of now, and the cultural space as of now. For me, this is my own opinion. What do we say on Twitter? These are my own opinions, not to be associated with Baraza. But for me, I think right now it's still, for now, it's exclusionary and elitist. Let me explain what I mean by that. All the shows that you want to see, either it's theater, Too Early for Birds, or you want to see Mudhoni Drama Queen with other show. Let me not mention names. Any other show that you want to see is happening on this side of the part of the world. How do we create infrastructure? Starting with infrastructure, for some of these things also to happen on the other side of the world, in the peri-urban areas, in the Eastlands areas. How do we go for, Morris has put together a festival in Kaloleni, and it happens. So I think that's the space that we all could work on. And what we've done with the governor is to be able to say, you already have infrastructure, which is the most expensive thing for most people, which are the social halls. And we are working with them to convert about 4 social halls to be mini convening spaces. And we can call them mini barazas. But again, it's not, exclusionary to any other players. It's more about Baraza being the convener, and whoever is within that space can come and do whatever they want, either podcasting, video, theater, whatever. So those are some of the few things that we've done with the county government that I think are, to be honest, could be replicated across other counties. But since you're speaking about Nairobi. Yeah.
Indeed. And thank you. And interestingly, that is actually what the social halls used to be. Right? And so it's actually going back to our history and saying what exists and how do we work to make it happen. And we never, like I said, Nairobi Administration is an interesting conversation on its own. So we take opportunity when we have it to make things that outlive personalities or institutions, particular organizations, so that in the next 10, 20 years, we are not repeating this conversation.
I think it was a very positive move for the Nairobi City County to come up with the legislation. Actually, it could be one among, I don't know, about 5 or so other counties who have come up with any legislation touching on the culture and the arts sector. So I think that was a very positive thing. And of course, these documents are documents which are normally reviewed after some time because you cannot have everything at the same time. Things will still come up. So I think what my colleague here has said about things which have been left out, I think it's an opportunity for the Nairobi to continue engaging, and also as they put a case for review of the act, because of course acts are reviewed after a certain period of time to take on board new developments. I think those are some of the things that they will need to engage with the members of the public and the people in the sector. Other than that, I think I want also to say that there are other legislations at the national level which maybe if we given time I would want to just mention. I mentioned about the culture and heritage policy, which is the overall mother policy in the Republic. And I believe this act was also anchored on the policy, because you do an act based on a policy. We should have borrowed a lot on it. Then we have other legislations. We have music policy, we have film policy, we have the National Archives and Documentation Act. So these are some of the national legislations and policy frameworks which the Nairobi County government moving forward would also be able to consult and see what needs to work for the county, domesticate specific for the needs of the county governments. Other than that, I think the issue of collaboration is very key when it comes to actualizing the acts, the legal frameworks, because it's one thing to have a document and another one to operationalize and have the document to work. So I think the creatives and the people working in the culture and creative sector have a lot of responsibility to look at the act and see what are the provisions which maybe the county government is not implementing, bring them up, engage the county government, so that it's not just going to be a document, but it's a document that works for the people, because laws and legal provisions are meant to work for the people. So there's that engagement needs to be there. And also, lastly, before I come back to you, I want to say that of late, the new administration in Nairobi, it's engaging, because I can say so at the national level. Nairobi has been missing for some time from our national events, but from last year, I think Nairobi is coming back to the scene. There's a program that we normally run called Kenya Music and Cultural Festival, which all counties participate, but believe you me, Nairobi has been missing from that festival for the longest time. But from last year, I think the new administration, it's now picking up, and they participated, and we hope they will also be able to participate in other national events that are organized by the national government. Thank you.
Thank you. Bwana Manzi, my name is Deborah Wanjogo. I represent Public Space Network, which is an organization that works with communities to rehabilitate abandoned places and turn them into livable spaces, livable public spaces. So one of the spaces we've worked with is Kamukunji, the historical Kamukunji grounds. And the history of that space is that it was abandoned, it was a hideout for thieves, and when Public Space Network worked together with the communities in that space, we rehabilitated it so much that the space became accessible to even children. The crime disappeared, and the police felt safe to move around that space once again. However, yes, imagine, no, for real. However, once that happened, now a new tussle came up between the national and the county government. Because of its history, the NMK in particular came in and said, this is our space. And then the county government came in and said, no, culture is devolved, this is our space. And now the grass, our community is asking who's going to fund this space. We are the ones who are doing all the rehabilitation. We are maintaining the space, but nobody is putting in money in that space. Nobody is doing anything for that place apart from the community. So how do we navigate the resolution of who owns what when it comes to such spaces? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wonderful example of what we were talking about earlier. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Peter Achayo. I speak as a Nairobian and a parent who likes hanging out with his daughters on Sundays. And I think for 5 years, we don't have Uhuru Park, Uhuru Gardens, Taifa Park. They are closed, and we also do know that there are very few other places that can offer a similar function. So perhaps this is a question I could have put to somebody from Nairobi County, but they are not on this panel. So as the only government representative, maybe you could have an answer around this. So I really hope that we can hear something on this. Thank you.
Based on the introduction that you people gave, some were born in Nairobi, others outside Nairobi. Now, already you are, I can group you into two different groups. We have insiders and outsiders. Because it comes out so clearly, because some people were born here, you are an insider. But when you go outside there, you are an outsider. The people who were born outside, when they come here, they are insiders, and so we can change the roles. How do you deal with the divide when it comes to communication or cultural communication? How do you deal with this idea of fitting in? A Nairobian going out to the outside world and you want to fit, or to outside Nairobi and you want to fit in there. Or someone from outside comes to Nairobi and wants to fit in. The identity, the culture, and the difficulties. Because the end of this conversation is we have to create cultural opportunities. So the difficulties that come with communication or cultural communication are always there when we are operating from those two different divides. Now, the second question that I have, in a brief one, is for the county government official. We know that politics is a divisive aspect. And we talk of Nairobi as being the cultural center. Now, it reaches a point that the tribal lines are drawn mostly during politics, and that's a fact. So, what are some of the initiatives that the Nairobi County is taking into consideration and spreading them to the people so that people in Nairobi can find opportunities related to culture even when there is politics and even when there are those divisions?
So these are questions that now reminds us of Nairobi's uniqueness. I don't think there's any other county that deals with the schizophrenic. Am I in Nairobi now? Am I at Taita? Am I at Kiambu? Am I Lodwar? What's my identity? And then the other question, I remind you, Mr. Manzi is from the National Department of Culture. So I'm wondering if any of you would want to comment as you do your closing remarks. But I just want to see any other quick comment or question. Yes, I'll take that one more. And then if there's anybody who wants to own Nairobi County at this point, I'll give you an opportunity. I know that a lot of these comments, Nairobi, I know the county of people are here, but they want to listen. And in the afternoon, a lot of these will be picked up. But if somebody from Nairobi County wants to speak to anything at this moment, I will give you an opportunity after her.
Yeah, so I'm a student at University of Nairobi taking journalism, development communication. So my question is to Julius mostly, and it spreads across. But as a player in the government, and given the untapped opportunities angle that you keep saying, Nairobi is and has been, as you preempted, a global even head for UN Habitat and all the things that we have here from offices and whatnot. So there are events that happen globally. We have the Africa Climate Summit coming. There's so many other things that happen, but we either take them to Gigiri through Expressway. We don't necessarily tap into that as county and what is being done to now incorporate that, and more so whether that's the culture bit as events are happening, And the other one would be to the formidable Joy Mboya, kudos on everything you're doing on the go down structure you're putting up. But then with regards to plan development, there is what you said, mushrooming and whatnot. But what role does culture play from that we can borrow into and incorporate as we build, so that we are not putting glass houses at the expense of both our culture and climate, that we can tap into, whether that's the Maasai structures. There were things that used to be done architecturally that used to help, but we've something. Yeah, we are lost. And then the last one, sorry, is to now politics, and that could go across the board. And maybe so, Maurice, given you have the platform from Baraza to go into that, and you preempted by saying Boniface Mwangi, maybe you can become the next one, because even how he got into that was through Power 254, and they used to convene people through that. And we find ourselves now, because also University of Nairobi changed, there's no SONU, it's UNSA now. UNSA is controlled and whatnot. Can we use that as strategy through the creatives to build circles where we can have conversations like this, or even more into it, instead of mandamano and destroying property and culture? Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
My name is Humphrey Otieno from Central Nairobi Initiative, which is part of Nairobi City County. We deal a lot with the issues, many questions that have been asked here. So around the issue of Kamukunji, thanks Deborah, I think this is a concern that has been actually brought to my desk. We are trying to sort it out with the county, the Green Nairobi department, to actually get KEG. KEG is your member, yeah? To get KEG as the managers of that park. They applied for ownership, but we can't give them ownership because, you know, it's a land, so it will bring issues. So, but we are working actually closely with them to see how they can manage. But on the question of the shared responsibility, if you look at the Culture Act, actually Article 15, it talks about shared spaces between national and county government. So where we need to declare a site, a particular site as a cultural site, then there's a shared responsibility between the county and the national government. So there's a framework on how we arrive at that, yeah? But the park actually is a county park, so there's no contention about that, yeah? It's only that it will be gazetted as a heritage, so that remains, as I already said, a shared responsibility. Then on the Pole Sana Mzae, I know when you're taking with your daughters, I also suffer the same. But remember, Uhuru Park was closed during NMS. The intention was not to do the whole rehabilitation. The intention was actually to just leave it open, but do some a few marekebisho hapa na pale, but they changed the entire thing. We were even surprised. And actually, if you see, when they were taken to court, SNI, actually we were with Shirley when we did that public participation. SNI is the one who featured, and actually the documents that we presented, were presented in court, are actually the ones we had actually worked on. So the idea was not to cordon it, but the whole, gava bile nafanya. There was interest from the White House, and that's why we are. So it's going to be opened very soon. We actually intended to open it in September, but apparently there's some technical work that haven't been finished. But it's going to be open soon. And again, this is also a call that I want to put here for all of us who are actually connecting with these spaces. When we are calling for, sometimes this is where we call the public to sometimes submit memorandums. Give your ideas in terms of what you want the space to, how do you want the space to be managed. If you leave it to the county, we will put fee, which you will not be able to pay. Then in terms of initiatives, yeah, there's quite a number of initiatives we are trying. At the neighborhood level, you've been seeing what we've been doing with the drum circle. These are some of the things that initiative we're trying to bring as much as possible, so that that's connecting space where people can actually fit in. Asante sana.
So now let me come to my panel, and you don't have to answer the questions. Leave me with a good word of inspiration so that I'm like, yeah, Nairobi County, we are here.
Last word, but fortunately I think, or unfortunately I don't have a specific question to respond to, except to say that the whole reason around having festivals that are across different neighborhoods was exactly to respond to that. That it is not about your tribe, it is not trying to demarcate the different politically instigated sections, but actually to bring us more together. We recently did a festival in the refugee camp, Kakuma refugee camp, and that was the idea. That, the Ethiopians will see what the Somalians are doing, the Somalis will see what the Rwandans are doing, and we find that actually there's more that we have in common than we have that is different. And so I think that festivals, I'm really a big, fan of festivals and what that can do in terms of just bringing us together, peace building and social cohesion, what that can do. But I wanted to say, first of all, it's a fantastic, well, not fantastic, but it's a good problem when you change Kamukunji and people begin to fight over it. I mean, it's a problem, yes, but that is like a case study. We need to kind of be able to reclaim spaces that need to, have that kind of ownership and people wanting to own it. So it's a problem, but it's a good problem. It's a good problem. But the other thing I wanted to say is that even as we have an opportunity to upgrade or look at the Act, I hope we can be ambitious. I was recently reading about it's called the Percent for Art policy in South Africa. And every contractor is required by law to put aside 1% of the budget towards a public art piece. And that has transformed the way that South Africa looks. Thank you, Muduma, I see you there. But it can be done. It's 1%. But it will change the face of Nairobi as we know it. So apart from, filling out the holes or the gaps that we see in the Act, we can be more ambitious. We can try and push the envelope a little bit to actually bring up and support the creative industries, the creative economy. And let's see what it is. I mean, I was also thinking about how Zanzibar has changed the way it sounds. In your ear, when you hear Zanzibar, you think about the Zanzibar International Film Festival, or you think about the Busara Festival. I mean, how can we change the way you hear Nairobi? And what can that look like? I think that we have so much wealth that we really need to tap into. So just an inspiration that we have an opportunity to really look at the Act. We have an opportunity to see how we can support the creative industries and creative sector, and the creatives themselves as well. Let's see how we create that modality to be able to engage with county. Thank you.
I'll respond quickly to the two questions, then I'll give my closing remarks. I think one of the things that I wanted to respond to is, for me, Nairobi is not, it's not insider or outsider. For me, Nairobi is a feeling. Nairobi is, when you get here, how do you feel? How does that define you? And I'll just do a quick poll. How many people studied outside Nairobi for high school? Outside Nairobi. How many of you went outside Nairobi for high school? Good. There was this thing in my high school where there was always Watu wa Nairobi. I don't know if you guys experienced it. Yeah? And we were always those people. But then the people who used to call us Watu wa Nairobi now are living in Nairobi. And now they are Watu wa Nairobi. So for me, Nairobi is not insider or outsider. Nairobi is a feeling, and being there, it's like if you're a New Yorker, there's a certain aura that you walk with and you feel because you're in that space. And I think that's what we're discussing here. How do we make Nairobi become a feeling and people can feel it, from the architecture to the acrobats on the streets to matatu culture. Like that defines Nairobi. So I'll not divide it that way. Then to your question around Boniface Mwangi and why I mentioned him, the thing is, I was trying to explain that we always have this culture of waiting for a hero to solve for our stuff and our challenges. Even Yashinsky sang in his song, right? Boni is the defender of people. But because of that, we've always had a very interesting relationship with power, because the person who stands out is the one who's, fingered in a sense. But what if a community comes together to solve for their own challenges? It doesn't have to be through maandamano, as you've said. I think more than often, we as the creative or the people within the culture space are the ones who become almost like spokespeople of the community, because we are in touch with the community. So when we do it through our songs, through our dance, we become the rebellion. And that's why mostly academics, creatives, media guys are usually the ones who are thrown out with authoritarian governments first, right? So that's why I mentioned it, not, yeah. I think for me, culture and the creative space is a double-edged sword, in the sense that if utilized really well, can be very inclusive. But also if taken advantage of, can be very exclusive. And you've seen that even through, oh, this is not our culture. When something's against me, when something's not aligning with me, it's different. That's not our culture, right? So that's when you use it on the other side. But also, when you listen to music, I've never heard anyone at a concert ask Calligraph Jones, what's your tribe? Nobody has ever asked him, right? I've never heard of, at least. We don't recognize tribe in that form. Or the acrobats around, we don't. So it's never divisive. But when you use it in a positive way, then it can be very, it can bring it can bring us together. So I think let's look at the positive side of culture and art. And for me, it's how do we incorporate that across Nairobi through investment in physical infrastructure that will enable that to be able to thrive, because that's the biggest cost in terms of having these spaces, just spaces for people to meet. You know, and stories are jabba. Go there and eat your jabba and story. If that's our culture, then let's do it, right? And also putting money to the creatives. You know, pay 50 shillings, 10 shillings here and there, if you can. That's the key thing. Because then you're appreciating and you're building something that your kids and kids' kids will come to appreciate as something that has been known as Nairobi.
I think I have two questions to respond to before I give my closing remarks. From Deborah, I think it has been touched by the officer from the county government. Constitution gives the dual mandate of both the historical sites and monuments to both the county and the national government, because they are those which the National Museums of Kenya manage, and there are those which the county governments manage. And to solve that issue of the confusion between which should fall under which, I think the National Museums of Kenya revised the National Heritage Act. And I think some of these things have been touched on that. But any historical sites, whether it's in a county government, but which requires to be gazetted as such, has to be done by the National Museums of Kenya, because they retains that mandate of gazetting national monuments and sites. So there's always going to be that dual relationship between the county government and national government in management of some of these historical sites and also monuments. From the lady from the university, I didn't get the name very well. You talked about events that are happening globally and what are the opportunities that come with them. I think, as I said at some point, that we have signed cultural agreements with the international community and also within the frameworks of the international conventions. We usually have a lot of opportunities coming for mobility of artists and mobility of cultural goods and services. And this is also something that the 2005 convention talks about in terms of obligating the North, that's the developed countries, to give opportunities to the developing countries in terms of encouraging mobility of artists and cultural goods and services. So whenever we get those opportunities, we do work closely with the county governments to actualize participation of artists and practitioners in those events. But of course, you know, it's a framework, so there will always be some cost to the people, to our artists, while the counterpart will take care of some other cost. Then what I would want to say as my closing remarks is that Nairobi County, with its proximity to the national government, I think needs to take advantage of that, so that there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of partnership in terms of how we move forward the cultural and creative spaces. And also the fact that Nairobi is the capital city of this country. I'm looking at how does it benefit from the cultural tourism, because we have a lot of visitors who come to Nairobi for business, for conferences, for other engagements. So how do we take advantage as creatives to market our products to these people, to create a market for ourselves? And also, so it's something that the county government needs to take up very seriously, to develop, to engage the creatives, and also try to open up the markets for the products of these creatives, so that those visitors who come to visit the Nairobi City County, the great county, are able to buy some of these products from our people, create a market space for our products. And lastly, but not the least, I think we also, as I have said, let's engage the government. Don't wait for the government to come to you always. I think it's a dual engagement. The government will engage the citizenry. The citizenry have also a role and an obligation to engage the government. Thank you.
We'll try and be brief and just pick up on what Julius has said, which is engage, and really do engage. In Nairobi County, the sector that is dealing with arts, culture and tourism is sitting within a ministry, if I can call it that, a county ministry, whose mandate is really around public participation and engagement and public access. So do engage the CC on that one, Silantoi, Madam Silantoi. That is the space that we sit in under arts and culture. So when we talk about how can we work with culture as a convener, there's a real opportunity there. But I think to just sort of say finally that the historical perspective I think is important. Let's see ourselves as makers of cultural history, and we make that by engaging. 50 years ago, I was on this stage. 50 years ago, I was in Kilimani Primary School. I was sitting in standard 3 or 2 in a class that at that particular point in time was predominantly white kids. There were probably 3 or 5 of us who were black. And I was on this stage learning how to speak English properly by presenting a poem and elocuting properly, okay? And now I'm sitting on this stage thinking about how do we shape this country and how do we shape this city according to our own culture and heritage. And I'll recite that poem because I remember, you know, these things sit in your head. And it is important that you have the right things sitting in your head. That poem was about an elfman. Do you know what an elf is? An elf is a little mythical creature that sits out of British, Saxon, Irish heritage. And the poem went like this. I met a little elfman once, down where the lilies grow. I asked him why he was so small and why he wouldn't grow. He slightly frowned, and with his eye he looked me through and through. I'm quite as big for me, said he, as you are big for you. Now, I came number 3 over there, and you know I came number 3 and not number 1, because now they're wondering, this African who can speak English like this. I lost it because the word asked, I didn't say I asked him why, I said I asked him why. I asked him why. Huh? Luga, mother tongue. Huh? I asked him why. But the whole point is, things change. We can make cultural history, and we should. So engage and make the history that represents who Kenya is today. Thank you.